Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. Today, we're going to be talking about what CFOs should expect in this post-pandemic. And joining me is Jack McCullough. He's the president of the CFO Leadership Council, a global organization dedicated to empowering the world's senior financial executives. He's a regular contributor to Forbes CFO Network, and his book, Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, and the forthcoming book, which I'm really looking forward to seeing, called the Psychopathic CEO and Executive Survival Guide. I just love that title. We're proud to be partnering with you, Jack, and the CFO Leadership Council. This is about equipping the present and future leaders of finance, dedicated to empowering senior financial executives to realize success. Say hello to our audience, Jack.
Tom, great to be here today. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and thanks for having me. And looking forward to just a fun conversation. I followed you for a while on social media, so it's great to finally actually get to know you a little bit.
Same here, and I'm looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to it since the last time we caught up. So let's start with this. You know, the past year forced all of us, but CFOs especially, to lead in different ways, especially with this remote workforce, working from home. What have they learned from a leadership perspective that will stay with us in the future?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that's really become more paramount than ever is communication. And by the way, that includes the listening part of communication too. But at the beginning of the crisis, it was communicate, communicate, communicate. You could never over-communicate. And you know what's interesting, Tom? There were two studies that are unrelated, but when you put them together, it just shows the importance of the CFO role in the modern world. The first one was, what institution do people believe in most? And it was things like religion, the media, politics, whatever. It turned out the institution people have the most faith in is their own employer. It's not corporate America generally, but it's the company that they themselves work at. And then the other one was, who's the most trusted executive within a corporation? And by far, it's the chief financial officer.
Yes.
So as the CFO, you're the most trusted person at the most trusted institution in your employee's life. And so you need to be communicating with them and letting them know that, yes, this is the greatest challenge of our careers, but we're going to come out of this stronger than ever. And you couldn't over-communicate during the time. There are other lessons, but I'd really focus on the importance of that one.
I like that one a lot. And I haven't seen that study, but I love that. And I would say I would agree with that, right? So yeah, the employer, and then the most trusted advisor inside the employer happens to be that CFO role. But the other thing I heard was just recently, and it might have been McKinsey, that said, to your point, this is the time to communicate or over-communicate, because people are all wondering about what's going to happen as we come through COVID, right? Vaccinations are cranking up. We're starting to see the curves flattening a bit in different parts of the country. So that is more critical than ever, is to paint the picture of what you feel like the work's going to be like when they go back, right? That's exactly what we're hearing.
Yeah, and I wish I had a crystal ball, but yeah, things are certainly going to be very, very different when we return. It's not like just one day, all of a sudden we're going to go back to the office and it'll be like it never happened. In fact, it's interesting. There was one company, I won't mention them by name, but I'll say it's one of the 5 biggest insurance companies in the world. And they opened their doors voluntarily and said, anyone who wants to come back in one particular city, and anyone who wants to come back can come back. And they have like 1,400 people in that city. One person showed up. So, if it's voluntary, the fact is people like working from home, and, we didn't plan it this way, but we've had a 1-year experiment on how safe it can be, how productive it can be. And it turns out it can be pretty safe and pretty productive, right?
Yeah.
So, now, there are elements that are missing, like, say a law firm where mentoring is such a big thing, where the associates want to build a relationship with the senior partners in the firm. It's just different when you can't just pop into somebody's office or catch up to them at the water cooler or whatever it might be. So, a lot to work out. I think we've probably solved most of the biggest problems related to the pandemic, but that's one that's going to be big in front of us.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think what we're starting to hear is that most are saying that most people want some degree of flexibility post-COVID. And then to your point, there are things that we do at work, like heavy collaboration, that isn't as good remote, no matter how good your remote systems and all are. So I think you're right. We're going to end up in this like blended kind of world, which gets me to the next question, which is, as they're thinking about this return to office, what's the impact on culture? And are you seeing anything in your CFO community around how they're dealing with culture in a quasi remote, all remote, or a work from home hybrid, right? What's that look like?
Yeah, and I think most companies will offer hybrid, and it will have positive and negative impacts on the culture. One, if you're headquartered in Boston, as I am, you have the opportunity to hire, not only all across the country, but across the entire world. So you can get the best people who fit into your culture, no matter where they are, to come work with you. But on the other hand, let's not be naive about it either, right? It is going to create some challenges. I'm from the generation, I have friends at work. And, a lot of times Thursdays and Fridays, and even early in my career, maybe Mondays and Tuesdays too, but never a Wednesday. But, we'd go out after work and, have a beer or a meal or something like that. And there is a bonding element that happens over those things that doesn't happen over Zoom. Yeah. So, it's definitely going to change. The other thing is generationally, it's interesting because in my world, like the older people didn't really want sort of the virtual environments. And I'm not saying older in a mean sense. I'm a baby boomer myself. So, but we liked sort of going into the office, and we thought the commute was inconvenient, but worth the effort. But younger people didn't understand that. They were like, no, I just want to work from home. I can do great work. I can be incredibly productive. It's more convenient, etc. Turns out both of us were right. And right. Both sides are admitting it. The younger people are saying, yeah, now that I haven't had the opportunity to go and build those relationships in person, now I understand what you're talking about. It is kind of lonely at home. On the other hand, I'm a parent of two, and I kind of like, saving that 10 hours a week that I used to be in my car. And I'm sure I'm not alone. So, both sides have said, yes, you're right, and I'm right too. Yeah. So it's an interesting generational thing.
That's pretty cool. Now that also segues to the idea of digital and digital transformation, right? So companies that weren't digitally focused a year ago are certainly now focused. And some of the CFOs who were ahead in that regard did much better through this pandemic. So what are you seeing, and what happens if a CFO doesn't make digital a priority?
Yeah, I mean, most companies, I think, Tom, in your world and my world, digitalization is going to have to be a priority. There are small, maybe local family-owned businesses, but if a company's big enough and complex enough to have a CFO, it probably needs to have, a digitalization strategy. I can't think of too many companies that I would consider an exception to that sort of thing. And, candidly, if you don't have a digital strategy, guess what? Your competition does. So, you're on borrowed time, my friend. So it's critical. But when you think about it, where else can a CFO adopt a strategy that's going to increase revenue, improve operational efficiencies, and also, improve collaboration with your employees? It's probably only with improved digitalization, right? So there have been some people that have procrastinated a little bit, but 2020 was the year to end your procrastination and go forth and do it. And, it's also, in a lot of cases, it's saved the company. Now, Disney's probably about as untouchable as any company could be, yet the movie business was gone and their theme parks were closed. Disney Plus changed them. They were doing like 1 million new subscribers a month.
Yeah.
And, just that wouldn't have happened without the COVID, obviously. But, they were prepared for it. They had that strategy coming. It just was accelerated a little bit more quickly, and it allowed them to keep being the iconic company that they are. Because if they didn't have that, they're Disney, right? They're a lot smarter than I am for sure, and they'd have figured something out. But it would have been a tough position to be in, because I believe for the most part the theme parks are still closed, right? So yeah, you're right.
So and to get back to that though, that the CFO, if they're one of those leading CFOs, right, they should be helping the company think through that digital strategy, correct? Not just worrying about digital for accounting, but looking at it for the business case.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten was from a CFO, and she told me when I'm talking to younger CFOs, don't think of yourself as a financial executive. Think of yourself as an enterprise-wide executive who happens to be an expert on finance and accounting. And it's so true. Back in in the 90s, when I first became a CFO, even then it was still a largely backward-looking job. But now it's a forward-looking job. And, there's a saying, you've probably heard it, Tom, controllers are the new CFOs. But controllers today are doing remarkably similar jobs to what I did 20 years ago with the CFO title. So it's critical. Have a great controller, and you can be on the forefront of the strategy and digitalization efforts for your company, where you belong. Because unless you're the 1 in 100 companies where the CEO used to be the CFO, you're probably the only financial expert in the company, or at least on the executive team.
Yeah, and you make that point, which is worth repeating, but it's that forward-looking. We hear a whole lot about FP&A, financial planning and analysis skills for that CFO or controller, as you say. And I think that's essential, right, in this new world that we're in.
Yeah, it used to be, geez, I'm going to sound like my granddad talking about in my day. But there was a point, that 9 out of 10 CFOs I knew, maybe even more than that, it was, public accounting, usually at a large firm, accounting manager, controller, CFOs, that type of progression. And now that's, still probably one of the most, direct routes to being a CFO. But I know so many people that have grown up in FP&A and become very successful CFOs because it's the broader skill set that you need. And, we have the luxury, we do have the most technically savvy and most well-educated generations in history, particularly as Generation Z enters the workforce. So you find world-class people. If your strength is in FP&A, find a world-class chief accounting officer, controller. Fill your gaps a little bit.
So, I like that, balancing out your team with the strengths, right? That's
absolutely.
All right, let's talk about growth right now, because I think we're still seeing growth in this market. Obviously, different industries at different scales, but what do you think the CFO's role gets to with this notion of growth, innovation, M&A, et cetera?
Yeah, it's interesting because, pre-pandemic, the biggest challenge members had, in my group at least, was simply building the team. You could Google war for talent, and every week there'd be 6 or 7 articles about how impossible it is to hire really good people. And then that slowed a little bit, but guess what, Tom? At least in my world, that war for talent is back. I'm getting calls, and you probably are too. I get 3 calls a day from recruiters looking for, and some of them aren't even like close to someone I would know. It's like, how would I know a software engineer in Cincinnati guy? Right. But that's literally a phone call I got. So I have a pretty good network, but I'm a finance guy in Boston. It's not that good. Yeah. But it's one of those things. Again, growth is really happening, and CFOs and all executives, for that matter, they're really building up their teams for it. And there's a lot of opportunity for it. The M&A market seems to be pretty hot. The IPO market, which you might have thought was dead, but with SPACs, we had a heck of a year on the IPO market, right? Not in the traditional way, but we evolved a little bit. And growth it seems like almost no matter what happens, you can slow things down for a few months, but growth just seems to come back.
Yeah, it's kind of neat, though, in light of all this stuff that we've been through in this pandemic, and you're seeing this growth thing being a major item, right? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd said a year ago at this time that hey, Mr. or Mrs. CFO, your biggest challenge is going to be that you can't hire quickly enough, every CFO I know would have taken that as the worst case scenario, right? That's the worst case. I can't hire enough good people. Okay, that's not a bad worst case.
Absolutely. All right. So we have to, Jack, we got to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? It's everywhere. And how does this impact CFOs? Like, how can they help their departments or their companies become more inclusive? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. And one thing, they're CFOs, but they're people too. And in almost all cases, they're good people. And they've sort of always valued diversity, equity, and inclusion, but never put it to the forefront. And I think some of the events of 2020 sort of said, hey, we've got some issues and we might actually be able to fix these a little bit. So one of them, another baby boomer reference, but one of them quoted Elvis Presley to me. He said, a little less conversation, a little more action, please. And that's kind of the mindset that they're taking right now. They've been talking about it for a few years, and now they want to take the concrete steps to make it happen. Again, they're very cross-functional, and DEI efforts are not going to work without involvement at the highest possible level, which to me is Chief People Officer or Chief Human Resources Officer, Chief Financial Officer, CEO. If those three aren't committed to it, and not just saying a few words at the company meeting, but actually making it part and parcel of a company's priorities and who they are as a company, it's not going to, your DEI effort, you might as well not try, because it's probably not going to work. So.
Yeah. And quite frankly, many CFOs now have the HR people functions under them, right? That's often, and they could help with the tracking and accounting, right? The metric side of it. That could be a whole nother opportunity, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that, is kind of good for them, right?
Yeah.
But, the thing is, like, the strategic value of a successful DEI program is fairly obvious. And, let's start with the obvious one is, if a rank and file employee knows that the executives value DEI and they're just not pretending to, that's very empowering.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to sit in company meetings silently. I actually know that I can voice an idea and it'll be listened to at the executive level. They're not just BSing me. They mean what they say. So, that's the greatest thing. It simply empowers every employee, which, enhances innovation, enhances decision-making. And then just as a practical matter, customers are going to expect you to do something. It turns out people don't want to, do business with people that pollute the environment and treat their employees unfairly and, cheat on their financial statements, among other things. So it helps you be perceived as an ethical company because it makes you an ethical company.
Yep.
So, and then recruiting off the college campuses, the 20-somethings really value this. And, if they're not going to go to work for a company that doesn't value it, and we all want to hire the up-and-comers, right? So
for me, probably the big piece is the inclusion part. If you create an environment where people feel like they belong and you include them, and I think there's a survey by Deloitte on the power of team, it was Deloitte Australia actually, that showed something like team performance goes up something like 800 times when you have good, diverse teams that are feeling like they belong. And I think that's something we could all do. Just imagine what you can do with that kind of growth rate if you kickstart that kind of inclusion thing.
If I could get my team to be that much more productive, I'd never work a day in my life.
Exactly.
Just come in. What are you guys working on? Sounds good. I'm hitting the greens. So.
All right. So now I want to talk a little bit about our partnership because we're really excited to be partnering with you on a couple of things. And so talk about what attracted you to the CGMA Finance Leadership Program that we're offering out to your members. What was your big idea to do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did my homework here a little bit, and so you weren't sort of selected at random. I'll say that. But a lot of my members are CFOs, but they're into developing their controllers, and they've got some great controllers, and they didn't all get their take their CPA exam when they were college seniors and work in public accounting for a few years. So you're looking for somebody with 5-7 years experience that, wants the learning that goes with a world-class program. Plus, let's be honest, the credential is a nice thing too, right? We all are impressed by people who have initials after their name. So I did my homework, and I will acknowledge my own ignorance. I hadn't heard of your program until a couple of years ago. And it was Ash mentioned it to me, actually. And so I checked it out. I'm like, geez, this is everything my members are telling me they want their controllers to learn.
Yeah.
So we explored it. It was a natural fit. I checked some references, and everybody who took the program spoke well of it. And it's like, yeah, everybody should have this at some point in their career. So I figured, let's just do it. And it's been a great win, I think, for our members and for the organization too.
Yeah. Well, we share the same goals in terms of trying to elevate this entire profession of management, accounting, CFOs, et cetera. So we continue to enjoy the partnership together. And I think we're coming up on the end of this. I want to close down a bit, any final thoughts, Jack, from our conversation that you want the audience to know about what's going on with CFOs post-COVID?
Well, I'd just like to say, first of all, to the CFOs, congratulations. This was the biggest challenge of your careers. As I said, there's no blueprint. The closest thing to this was probably the Spanish flu of 1918, but those CFOs aren't available to ask how they ran their businesses, I don't think. So they'd be in their 140s right now. So mostly they probably passed on. But, congratulations just for surviving, because it's easy to take it for granted now. But a year ago, it wasn't certain that all of us were going to, our companies would survive. But survive we did. So now we were given this opportunity to regrow our companies, and let's do that. And you don't have to go it alone. There are incredible resources available out there to make you a better finance and accounting professional and just a better broad executive. So don't feel like you're in this by yourself. The whole economy is backing you.
Yeah.
And getting back to the trust factor, your employees are really counting on you.
Yeah, I think that's perfect words for this community. And anyhow, Jack, thank you so much. You're going to be back with us in a few weeks, as a matter of fact. And I want to talk a couple about where you can. So I think we covered a lot of ground, but I want to talk a little bit about how you can stay in touch with Jack. First of all, get a copy of his book, The Psychopathic CEO, an Executive Survival Guide. We have to talk about that next. It's on Amazon, I believe, right? And you can probably get it on your website.
Yeah, it's actually going to come out in May or June.
Okay.
I'm self-publishing, so which is good and bad. I don't have any pressure to hit a deadline. On the other hand, I may not hit a deadline. So, but I'm self-publishing on Amazon, so you'll be able to get it there. And and I'd say probably mid-May. So.
All right. And if you want to look at his CFO focused events, it's CFOLC.com. That's the CFO Leadership Group. And then the CFO conference is coming up, Jack. It's called A New Hope. And this is the one you do with MIT, right?
Yeah, we have, it's a partnership with MIT Sloan. They'd have a 3-day class on the campus, and we had a conference the same week. With COVID, we just weren't able to make it work. So theirs is going to be in the fall and ours will be in June. But we have 5 MIT professors speaking at the event, hosting some of the best CFOs in the country in a fireside chat. And their fingerprints are all over it. And our fingerprints are all over their program as well. So,
and that's going to be on June 7th through the 9th. It is going to be virtual. And the theme is A New Hope, which I think is very appropriate for where we are right now.
Yeah, it meant I couldn't get the CFO of Disney to speak. I guess they thought I stole it from them or something.
And Jack's on Twitter, by the way, at Jack _McCullough, McCullough. And Jack, thank you so much for joining me on this Future Ready Live session. And we'll be back the first and third Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern. We'll see you then. Thank you.